Okay, friends, it's the moment you've all been waiting for. For years and years and years, you've been waiting for us to begin this program, and now we're finally arrived. The inaugural shiur of what we call this year's program. Let's just remind you, 3 years ago we did original insights on the parsha and what we called imponderables. 2 years ago we did davar yafe be'itai. We connected the parsha to the zman of the year. Last year we did pisachenu megadim. We connected the beginning and the end of the parsha. This year, b'siyata d'shmaya, we have a new program, and it's called, before I tell you what it's called, let me tell you what it's all about. We're going to connect the parsha to the previous parsha. We're going to find the connection between the end of the previous parsha and the beginning of the new parsha. Now, who says there is a connection? The answer is Chazal say there's a connection. Very often, Chazal say, Lama nismacha parshas meraglim leparshas Miriam, Lama nismacha misas Miriam lepara aduma. Chazal always ask, what's the juxtaposition? The only thing is, Rashi sometimes discusses it, but usually he doesn't tell us, which means that maybe it's self-understood, or for whatever reason, it's not discussed. So I thought it would be an interesting topic, which is based on a principle that we already find in Chazal, that there's a connection between the parshiyos. So I was going to call it Semuchim. I wanted it to have the word Semuchim in there, because Semuchim is really the basis of this whole program. And actually, there's a Gemara in Bereishis on Daf Yud, Semuchim min ha-Torah minayin. How do I know Semuchim min ha-Torah? Meaning, how do I know there's significance to the juxtaposition of different parashiyos? Shenemar Semuchim la'ad le'olam, juxtaposed forever and ever. And that's a pasuk in Tehillim. So I wanted to use the word Semuchim for the name of the sefer, but the word la'ad wasn't doing it for me. So I found a different word. I figured Semuchim miyad. Miyad means Semuchim juxtaposed, miyad, immediately. Now, if you want to know the deeper reason of why I picked the word miyad, here's what we're going to do. The first two people who come up with the answer will receive a copy of a sefer. Semuchim miyad, mem yod daled. We'll see if you could get you should be able to get most of it, but I'm only giving this if you get the full, okay? You have to get the mem, the yud, and the daled. So I'm looking around, did anyone ever use the name of the sefer before? Because, you don't want to call a program a name and then somebody already wrote a sefer on that. So I'm looking around, sure enough, there's a sefer, Semuchim la'ad, from that pasuk. And you know who wrote it? Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen of Izmir. And Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen of Izmir is the great-great-great-grandfather of my wife. So, my great-great-great-great-grandfather-in-law already beat me to it. But, luckily he didn't take the name Semuchim miyad, he took the name Semuchim la'ad. Now, I didn't have the sefer, so on Erev Yom Tov, I called Gedalia Schwartz, and I said, Gedalia, I need the sefer today, before Yom Tov. And he was able to find it in Lakewood. And he was able to find a ride for the sefer. And I got it Erev Yom Tov, Semuchim la'ad. Now let me tell you the difference between what we're going to do and the sefer Semuchim la'ad. The sefer Semuchim la'ad finds a connection between every single subject in the Torah. Within the parshiyos, let's say, if the Torah puts the mitzvah of Makeh next to the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKein, the Sefer Semuchim la'ad finds the reason for the juxtaposition of every single detail of the Chumash. We're just going to focus on the juxtaposition of the parshiyos, which he does as well. So at the end of every section, of every parsha, I'm going to bring down all of his approaches to the juxtaposition of the parshiyos. But first we're going to have our own. Okay? Our section will be called Semuchim miyad, and then followed by Semuchim la'ad. Let's see. Nope. Let's try to bring it up here. Okay. I hope you could see it here. Are you able to see it here on the screen? Here? Semuchim miyad? Yeah? Okay. As you see, it's 12 pages long. Okay? We're not going to do all of it because some of the 12 pages are from the original Sefer, Semuchim La'ad. So you see from page 7 and on, it's from Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. But here are, and you're going to see that the first couple of them are already from the Gedolei Achronim. Okay. So the source of Semuchim in the Torah comes from the Gemara in Berachos Daf Yud. And the Rabbi Eliyahu HaKohen of Izmir says, if there was nothing to learn from the Semuchim, why would the Gemara need to say Semuchim and Torah minayin? And the Gemara and the Medrash are malei of Semuchim. I would say that even those who do not necessarily take much stock in Semuchin, there would definitely be an inyan of smichos connecting the end of the Torah to the beginning of the Torah. There's a concept, yesh linoitz soif ha-Torah l'tchilasa. You should always connect the end of the Torah to the beginning, like the Shas Tshuvas Radvaz says that's why we read Bereishis right after V'zois Haberacha and Simchas Torah. You know, we take out 3 Sifrei Torah on Simchas Torah. The first one we read V'zois Haberacha. The second one we read Bereishis. The third one we read the Maftir. So the Radvaz asks, first of all, nowhere in the Gemara does it say we should read Bereishis. So it's only a minhag. So that should be the third Sefer Torah. First of all, the Maftir is Tadir. Second of all, the Maftir is Tadir. So the Maftir should come earlier. But the Radvaz says it's the reason for that is yesh linoitz soifai b'tchilasai. You want to stick the end of the Torah back into the beginning. Like the Sefer Yetzirah writes, No'atz soifan b'tchilasan. And if you take the last lamed of Bereishis and the first beis of Bereishis, you have Lev Shamayim, and lamed beis is Meramis to many inyanim el yanim. Okay, so here we go. Actually, what's amazing is the Chabif, Reb Chaim Falaji, wrote an entire book just connecting the end of V'zois Haberacha to the beginning of Bereishis. Can you imagine? He wrote 102 connections between the end of V'zois Haberacha and the beginning of Bereishis. I'm just going to share one of them with you here. Reb Chaim Falaji says that the 5 Sifrei Chumash correspond to the 5 senses. Bereishis corresponds to the sense of sight. The word Bereishis could be scrambled to read Shebira'is, of vision. Therefore, the Torah ends Le'enei Kol Yisrael, to the eyes of the Jewish people, and it begins Shebira'is, vision. So Le'enei Kol Yisrael, Bereishis Shebira'is, a lashon of Re'iyah. Unbelievably, the Vilna Gaon himself connects the end of V'zois Haberacha to the beginning of Bereishis. Says the Vilna Gaon, we discussed in the earlier shir the story of Talmai HaMelech, the Septuagint, who he commissioned the 72 Chachamim to translate the Torah. And they didn't want to write Bereishis bara Elokim. So they wrote Elokim bara bebereishis. They wrote Elokim bara bebereishis. But in our Torah, what does it say? Bereishis bar Elokim. Says the Gaon, and it's found in the Sefer Tiferes LaMoshe. Le'enei Kol Yisrael. To the eyes of the Jewish people, it says Bereishis bar Elokim. But to the eyes of the nations of the world, it says Elokim bara Bereishis. That's another beautiful connection. Le'enei Kol Yisrael. Bereishis bar Elokim. But to everyone else's eyes, it says Elokim bara Bereishis. That's the Vilna Gaon's connection between the end of the Torah and the beginning of the Torah. To Talmai HaMelech, it's Elokim bara bebereishis. Another aspect of this is that, there's an idea only the Jewish people can comprehend Torah. The nations of the world cannot comprehend the Torah. So, to Klal Yisrael, if you take the final lamed of the Torah and you stick it with the first base, you have leiv, you have understanding. However, David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Machon Maggid Harakiah, we teach the Torah to Yaakov. Chukav v'mishpatav liYisrael. Lo ya'asa chen l'chol goy. This was not done to any other nation. Umishpatim bal yida'um. The nations of the world, even if they try to copy the Torah, bal yida'um, they can't understand it because they don't understand the Torah Sheba'al Peh. To them, the Lamed and then the Beis, they can't understand that there's an oral tradition. You hook the final Lamed to the first Beis. They look at the first Beis and then the final Lamed and they say Baal, meaning they can't understand it. To them it's closed off. You see, if you only have the Torah Shebechsav, then you go from Lamed. If you only have the Torah Shebechsav, you look at the first Beis, you look at the Lamed, Baal. Bal Yida'um, they can't comprehend. But if you have the oral tradition that the end of the Torah hooks back into the beginning, then it's Lamed Beis, then you have a heart to understand it. Rabbi Kiva Eger connects the end of the Torah to the beginning of the Torah. The Torah begins with a Beis, it ends with a Lamed. What's the letter before Lamed? Kaf. What's the letter before Beis? Aleph. That's Ach. You have the Beis and Lamed, Beis of Bereishis, Lamed at Leinik HaYisrael. The letters before Ach. Ach is a miot. If you take the letter after Lamed, Mem. The letter after Beis, Gimel. Gam. That's a riboy. Right? So you have the first Beis of Bereishis and the final Lamed of Leinik HaYisrael. So that's Bal. You take the letters before Ach. The letters after Gam. Ach is a miut. Gam is a riboy. In the middle is leiv. This is what Chazal mean. Echad hamarbe v'yachad hamamit uvovad sheyichavein liboy lashamayim. Meaning, the Torah begins and ends with leiv to teach that whether you add like Gam or whether you detract, meaning whether you learn a lot or you learn a little, the main thing is leiv. You need to make sure your heart is connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. By the way, the Kli Yakar also has an amazing observation about the opening and closing letters of the Torah. He says, that which the Torah begins with a Beis and ends with a Lamed, that which the Torah begins with a Beis and ends with the Lamed. And by the way, this also works with Pesachenu Megadim, meaning we're hooking the end of the Torah to the beginning is almost synonymous with finding a connection between the beginning and end of the Torah. It's very interesting. All of the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yud, Vav, and Hey, you could connect it to a Beis or a Lamed, and it will make a word. For example, a Yud with Beis to Yud, B. Beis to Vav, Boy. Beis to Hey, Ba. Those are all words. Or Li, Loi, La. There are only two letters that these letters you could connect to any of the Oisiyos of Hashem's name. Beis and Lamed. B, Boy, Ba, Li, Loi, La. But you can't do that to any other letter. So let's say a Mem. Or let's say an Aleph. E. E is a word. Oi maybe is a word, but is not a word. Or let's say Mem. Mi is a word. Mai is not a word. Only Beis and Lamed you could connect to any of the Oisiyos of Hashem's name. What does this show? This shows that the world and its fullness is all dependent on Hashem, and He owns everything. So the word Hashem begins with the letter Beis. The Torah begins with the letter Beis because Hashem is showing everything is dependent on B, me. So God says, Beis, be, it's all dependent on me. His creations say, Boy, everything's dependent on him. And Ba and Boy are Zachar and Akeva. So in other words, and it all shows that it's all dependent on Hashem's Achdus. Or Hashem says, Li, the world belongs to me, and all of creation says Loi or La, it all belongs to Hashem. So the Torah is the opening and the closing of the Torah with Beis and Lamed, because those letters could always connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name, and therefore it begins with Beis to indicate everything is B, it's all dependent on Hashem. Everyone says it's all dependent on Bay and Ba, or Li, Loi, and La. Okay? So those were Perushim of the Gra, Reb Chaim Falaji, Rabbi Kiva Eger, the Kli Yakar. Here's where we're going to kick in some of our humble ideas. Okay. The Torah ends as follows. Nobody ever stood up as a prophet among the Jewish people like Moshe Rabbeinu with all the miracles that he did. And basically the Torah ends with the praise and the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu. However, how does the Torah begin? The Torah begins Bereishis. Bereishis. In whose merit was the world created? The Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Lo ivri alma ela Moshe. The world was created in the merit of Moshe. In Bereishis Rabbah, it says, Bereishis bar Elokim, in the merit of Reishis. Who's Reishis? Moshe Rabbeinu. Vayar Reishis Loi. In fact, the Igra de Kala says that Bereishis could be unscrambled to read Bishvil, in the merit of Moshe, the world was created. B'schus Roya, in the merit of the shepherd. Asher Shar, who sang Tehilas Yam, the song of the sea, Bar Elokim. So the Torah ends with the greatness of Moshe, and it begins Bereishis Bar Elokim, in the merit of Reishis, in the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu, the world was created. Let's add another idea. The Torah ends with Moshe's unparalleled, incomparable level. Like come b'Yisrael Navi Kemoshe. And just like he was the greatest Navi who ever lived, he also performed the greatest miracles that were ever performed. So you'll ask, how was he Zoiche to achieve such great levels? How was Moshe Rabbeinu Zoiche to reach such levels of Nevuah and such levels of Nisim? We all know that everything that Moshe achieved was because of his humility. Reb Chaim Volozhiner said it was because of Moshe Rabbeinu's great humility. The word Bereishis are the letters B'She'eris. The Rishonim bring B'She'eris, in humility. Reb Chaim Falaji also brings this from the Zohar. The word Bereishis could be read B'She'eris. So we could read it like this. Like Kam Yisrael Navi K'Moshe. There was never a Navi like Moshe. And nobody ever performed miracles like Moshe. And why was he Zoicha to that? Bereishis, B'She'eris. It was because of his humility. Here's another idea. The Torah ends all the miracles that Moshe performed in Mitzrayim. It begins with the creation of the world. Well, for those who have been listening to the shiurim over the last couple of years, I'm sure you'll remember that the Medrash, the Psikta, tells us that Paroi was struck with the 10 makos because he did not believe in the 10 statements of creation. The Tzrar Hamar teaches that the makos and the wonders authenticated the creation of the world. That's how Shabbos is both Zecher L'Maaseh Bereishis and Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Maral says in Gevuras Hashem how each Makkah authenticated each statement of Brias Ha'olam, which is the kesher between the Oisos and the Moivsim at the end of the Torah and the creation of heaven and earth. In other words, The Torah ends with the miracles of Egypt. The Torah begins with the creation of the world. What's the connection? Very simply, the miracles in Mitzrayim upheld and authenticated God's creation of heaven and earth. Like we've learned many times, Paroi denied creation. Hashem substantiated it with the miracles of Egypt. So the Torah ends with the miracles of Mitzrayim, and it segues into the creation of the world. But there's another aspect over here. The Orchos Chaim of the Rosh says, anyone who doesn't believe that God took us out of Egypt doesn't believe God created the world. What does that mean? That means if you don't believe in Hashem's divine providence, you don't believe in creation ex nihilo. Hashgacha pratis, God's ability to override the system, indicates that He's the creator. Like the Ramban says in Va'eschanan, the reason given for Shabbos in Parshas Yisro is to commemorate the creation of the world. The reason given for Shabbos in Va'eschanan is to commemorate Yetzias Mitzrayim. Says Ramban, Yetzias Mitzrayim indicates that if God has divine providence and He could change nature, He must have created the system. So therefore, says Ramban, if you ever have any doubts about Shabbos that indicates Hashem created the world, if you have any question whether when you rest on Shabbos, did God indeed create the world? The answer is, remember what God did in Egypt. If He overrode the system, that means He made the system. So Shabbos is Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, and Yetzias Mitzrayim is Zeichel Shabbos, because on Shabbos you can remember God's the creator. How? By thinking about all the things that He did in Mitzrayim. Therefore, from all the miracles that Hashem sent to do in Mitzrayim, like it says at the end of the Torah, L'chol ha'oisos ha'moivsim asher shlachei Hashem la'asos be'eretz Mitzrayim le'enei kol Yisrael, that testifies and that upholds that Bereishis ba'ar Elokim. The Ramban learns from the miracles of Mitzrayim that authenticates creation, and again, that's just another dimension. Not just Paroi was a heretic in the creation of the world, and God, so to speak, recreated the world through Yetzias Mitzrayim, but also Yetzias Mitzrayim authenticates that Hashgacha Pratis authenticates Brias Ha'olam Yesh Me'ayin. Okay. Interesting. The last pasuk in Chumash, Asher Asa Moshe, that Moshe made, that Moshe did. We're talking about the actions of the tzaddikim. It's referring, according to Rashi, to the breaking of the luchos. With how many hands did Moshe break the luchos? He broke it with 2 hands. And with how many hands did Hashem create heaven and earth? Hashem created heaven with 1 hand, and Shamayim and earth with 1 hand. Af yadi yasta eretz v'mini tibcha Shamayim. So Bar Kapara darshans and ksubas, the actions of tzaddikim are greater than the creation of heaven and the earth. But look how these two ideas are juxtaposed. The Torah ends with the actions of Moshe, Asher Asa Moshe. The actions of tzaddikim are with 2 hands. The actions of Hashem, of creation of heaven and earth, heaven with 1 and earth with 1. This highlights the drush of Chazal, Gedoyle Masei Tzaddikim Yoser Mimase Shemayim Ba'aretz. Okay, we're almost there. According to the Sfarno, the words L'enei Kol Yisrael are going on the time that Moshe Rabbeinu was koineh his great madrega to speak to Hashem panim al panim. L'enei Kol Yisrael is explaining, how did Moshe reach the level that he spoke to Hashem panim al panim? After all, originally Moshe was afraid to look at Hashem's face. It says that Moshe hid his face when Hashem appeared to him in the burning bush. But when he went into the Arafel, when he went into the dark cloud to accept the Torah, Le'enei Kol Yisrael, the Sforno explains, Moshe Rabbeinu was catapulted to the level of Nevuah of Panim al Panim. That means the Torah ends with Maimed Har Sinai. Now we know the receiving of the Torah, Kabbalas HaTorah, upheld all of creation. You know, Rashi brings in this week's parsha, Vayi'era vayivoiker yoim hashishi. Why does it say yoim hashishi? It doesn't say yoim hasheni. It says yoim sheni, yoim shlishi, yoim revi'i. Why does it say hashishi? All of creation was dependent on the sixth day of Sivan. And then Rashi writes in a Gilyon, the sixth day of Sivan, where Klal Yisrael accepted the Torah upheld all of Bereishis. You know what gave stability to Bereishis? Kabbalas HaTorah, Yom HaShishi. When Moshe accepted the Torah, then Bereishis had Kiyum. So the Torah ends that Moshe went into the dark cloud to accept the Torah, and through doing that, by accepting the Torah, Bereishis Bar Elokim, Bereishis, creation was given stability. Okay, one more. You know, Rashi says that the Torah begins Bereishis Bar Elokim, even though the Torah is not a history book, because of the following principle: Koyach ma'asov higid la'amoy laseis lahem nachlas goyim. Hashem showed His power so that nobody could claim the Jewish people are occupying Eretz Yisrael, because God created the world and He gives it to whoever He wants and He takes it away whenever He wants. But the reason the Torah begins with Bereishis Bar Elokim, Rashi says, Koyach ma'asav higid la'amoy. And what does the Torah end with? Moshe breaking the luchais. Amazingly, the Avos Rav Nasan says that when the Moshe saw the sin of the Egel, Moshe said, how can I give them the luchais? So the Zakanim got a wind that Moshe wasn't going to give the luchais. They started chasing Moshe. So Moshe was about to break the luchais. They grabbed it from him. The Zakanim literally took one end of the luchais and Moshe took the other end. There was a tug of war. Here's a little trivia question. What was the first tug of war in history? The first tug of war was between Moshe and the 70 Zakanim. And who won? Moshe won. Moshe grabbed it out of their hands and he broke it. Says the Avos Rav Nasan, Chazak koichai shel Moshe mikulan, shenemar, the last pasuk in the Chumash, ulechal hayad achazaka, ulechal hamayra agada, asher asa Moshe le'enei kol Yisrael. So the Torah ends showing the koyach of Moshe, that he wrestled the luchais from all the 70 Zakanim, and it begins B'koichai shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Koyach Masav Higid La'amoy Laseis Lahem Nachlas Goyim. By the way, Reb Chaim Falaji says that's why the first pasuk in Chumash has 28 letters, Gematria Koyach. So it ends B'koichai shel Moshe and it begins B'koichai shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The final 6 pages are the connections between the end of Zos HaBracha and the beginning of Bereishis from Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. The first 6 pages we had from the Gra, from Rabbi Kiva Eger, from Reb Chaim Falaji, and the Kliyakar, and a few humble ones that we added. And you could take a look at some of the other ones from Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen of Izmir over Shabbos. But this is an amazing smichos between the end of Zos HaBracha and the beginning of Bereishis. Stay tuned, I just have one more thing I want to share with you.
Recording stopped.